I know I am very Mzungu. I talk fast, I walk fast, I think fast. I want things to be done quickly, right? Because this is how startups survive. That's not always the pace that a smallholder farmer is interested in. So one of the issues that our farmers have right now is that when the rainy season comes, everyone plants the exact same crops. So 3 months later, everyone is harvesting the same crops. So for a month, there's oversupply in the market, prices drop, farmers get frustrated, and they say, hey, farming's not worth my time. But if they had planted 2 months earlier or 2 months later, they might have been able to hit it when prices are 2, 3, or even 4x higher. We had a guy just a month or two ago, he had never done commercial farming before, so he'd done maize and beans, but that was it. He made, on a per acre basis, revenue, not profit, but on a per acre basis, he made 860,000 shillings in one season. So obviously, if you're able to do that 3 seasons a year, you're talking about 2.4 million shillings, and that is life-changing money. In Kenya and across the continent, there is land, there are people, and there is water, but they are not combined intelligently in a way that they can be productive together. And so you have millions of smallholder farmers and millions of acres with people practicing subsistence farming with rain-fed agriculture, basically just praying for good rains, and so accordingly they get extremely low yield.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Organic Guy podcast. This is your home of organic conversations. I'm your host, the Organic Guy, and around here we have conversation around how we can make our food system really work for us rather than against us. So today I've got a very interesting guest. He's worked with a lot of small-scale farmers. He knows something or two about technology, so that will be interesting to see how we can sort of make our small-scale farmers' lives a little bit easier. So he's the co-founder and CEO of Stable Foods, goes by the name of Andrew Massaro. Andrew, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so your second name, is it an Italian name?
That's right, yes. My heritage is Italian. My great-grandparents came over from Italy to the United States in the 1930s.
Ah, okay. So you grew up in the United States?
I grew up in the United States, born and raised, yeah.
Yeah, so how was that experience, like growing up? Because for us, in this continent, I guess our lives are very, very different, but sort of help us paint a picture to like how was the environment like growing up in the United States?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'll say that until you realize what else is out there, you just think that whatever you did was normal. And so for my first 18 years, I thought I had just like a pretty normal life. Suburban living, 2 really great parents. They're separated, but that's okay. Great parents, 2 siblings. Went to high school, knew I wanted to go to college, all that kind of stuff. And so in some ways, maybe a pretty traditional upbringing in sort of white, upper middle class, suburban America.
Yeah. So which state is this?
Born and raised in Virginia. So I was in Virginia the 0 through 18 before I left to go to university. Yeah, okay, interesting. And then you went to Virginia as well, Virginia University. Sure, yeah, my academic journey is a bit interesting. My first university I matriculated at was Stanford University. So I moved from when I was 18 years old to Stanford. I was there for a year. It didn't actually really fit with me very well. It was a great place, but it wasn't a great place for Andrew. And so I transferred actually to the University of North Carolina, which is famous because that's where Michael Jordan went to school. And that's where I finished my undergraduate degree. Yep. And then many years later, after jobs and a few other things, when I was 30 years old, I got my business degree, my master's of business administration at the University of Virginia.
Yeah. So you knew like in an early age you wanted to do business or no?
That is an interesting question. Not really, actually. I knew at an early age that I wanted to be creative and explore the world and not necessarily be tied down to anything in particular. So my first 4 jobs after college, so after undergrad before master's degree, were very interesting, very diverse, but not necessarily on a career path. I just wanted to see the world and get some experience. And then only in my late 20s did I say, you know what, I'm not going to use my undergraduate degree, which is psychology. I never intended to be a psychologist. So let's do a business degree because that opens the doors to a lot of things.
Yeah, because that's I imagine that's very different because you've worked with a Fortune 20 company, you've traveled to like Latin America, and you're in Africa right now. Yeah. So I'm wondering like how is that experience like, especially if you look at the South and the Latin America space and in the African context, both classified as like third world countries. What do you think is the difference, or is there like similarities between?
Sure, that's really interesting. So you're right. My first couple jobs after university, so 22, 23, 24, up till 28, were in Latin America. And that was when I really sort of fell in love with, how do I say, not living in the United States. Partially because living in the United States, as we all know right now, can be pretty difficult and pretty unpleasant. And I do feel like a coward for leaving, but that's just not where I feel called to be right now. And then also there's just a lot of really interesting things going on, and that's what drew me to East Africa. So I moved to East Africa in April of 2018, and it was because there are some really interesting companies, really interesting social enterprises, possibly even really interesting NGOs that are doing creative, innovative work. And East Africa, in some ways, I would consider sort of a pocket for that. And so that is what drew me here. In terms of the comparison between Latin America and East Africa, there are some similarities, specifically in agriculture, a lot of smallholder farmers, a lot of sort of poor infrastructure, maybe not very stable governments, and also, therefore, lots of opportunity to build things that can be really both helpful, beneficial, and maybe profit producing.
I like the fact that you say, like, you see in terms of like opportunities that are available given the kind of circumstances are within these areas. That's very interesting. In Kenya now, you've worked in South America and you've come to Kenya. Like, take us through that process. How is it settling in Kenya? Is it easier?
Yeah, that's interesting. So when I moved to East Africa in 2018, and I moved to Rwanda. So I lived in Rwanda for 2 years, and now I've been in Kenya for 5 years. So the first move from the United States was directly to Rwanda, and that was, relatively easy. Again, I'd lived outside the United States for many years before. I know that you don't just expect the same life, and that's not what I wanted. So I was getting what I wanted. I wanted different, interesting, unique, and so that's what that was happening. Rwanda was a less easy place to acclimatize to than Kenya, and I would say first and foremost because of the language. I do not speak Kinyarwanda, and I do not speak French. I speak English and Spanish. Obviously, 99% of Kenyans speak perfect or nearly perfect English, right? So it's very easy to just get in with people, to get around, etc. Whereas in Rwanda, there was I felt it a little bit more isolating because I had very few friends that were not expats, because not that many Rwandans, or fewer Rwandans than Kenyans, speak English, and so there was just a smaller population of people that I could communicate with.
Yeah. So it's easier for you. It was easier for you to settle in Kenya than in Rwanda. Okay.
Also, Kenya's bigger, right? Just a little bit more developed. I think we can all say that from an HDI or a GDP per capita perspective. And also, let's just be honest, whether it's Kenya or not Kenya, Nairobi is the political, social, and economic capital of East Africa, right? And so there's just a lot going on. If you want to be engaged, if you want to do cool stuff like this, if you want to have cool professional opportunities, this is the place where those opportunities are most abundant. They exist everywhere, but Kenya has the most of them.
Yeah, that's very true. It's really interesting to have like an outside perspective or view of how Nairobi is viewed. It gives us a lot of perspective and also like appreciation of what we have as well.
Nairobi is an incredible city. I'm not going to say it's perfect. Obviously, we all know its imperfections, but it has basically everything you could ever want. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here, and I appreciate both the Kenyan people and the Kenyan government allowing me to be a guest in this country.
Yeah, nice. So let's talk a little bit about agriculture. Obviously, you have started a very cool company, Staple Foods, co-founder, and you're the CEO. So take us through the story behind it. Like, how did you end up starting Staple Foods?
Yeah, well, we'll start from the beginning. So I got to give a lot of credit to a few other people who are like the true originators. So there's a venture builder. Are you familiar with the term venture builder, right? A company that builds little businesses that then grow up. A venture builder started by a woman named Ruth Burtons, who's here. The venture builder is called Pyramidia Ventures, and they basically work to solve inefficiencies in food production systems, agricultural systems. And so one of the primary inefficiencies that they had identified, which is the thesis for Stable Foods, is that in Kenya and across the continent, there is land, there are people, and there is water, but they are not combined intelligently in a way that they can be productive together. And so you have millions of smallholder farmers and millions of acres with people practicing subsistence farming with rain-fed agriculture, basically just praying for good rains. And so accordingly, they get extremely low yield, which therefore does not contribute to food security. It does not contribute economically in any material sense. But that asset, the land, the asset, the people, and the asset, the water, are all at a 10% utilization rate. If we can combine them intelligently, then all of a sudden we can massively increase our productivity, and that is going to be good for the world in so many different downstream ways. And so that vision was born out of, or that idea was born out of some Pyramidia, the venture builders' ideas, and then they said they wanted to put together a business. They did a couple months of tests and pilots. It went pretty well, and they said, okay, let's get some real money, some institutional investment. The institutional investors said, we're not giving you a shilling unless you have a CEO in place, and so then they went to the market to look for a CEO. I happen to have just resigned from my previous company. Shout out to my previous company, Ken Taste, East Africa's largest manufacturer of coconut products, an awesome company doing awesome stuff, putting out great products, and employing over 300 people in Ukunda. But I had just left because I was looking for a slightly different, let's call it adventure, opportunity. And so I was just in the perfect opportunity to step into the CEO position of Stable Foods. So that was June of 2022.
Oh, okay. So you've been working on this for
A little over 2.5 years.
2.5. Okay, nice. So then take us through like the thesis. You mentioned the thesis there about Staple Foods. Like, what exactly are you doing, and what are you offering farmers that might not exist in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So we firmly believe that we are offering a solution that nobody else there is offering. There are some companies that offer things that are similar, but they have limitations, and we go much further. Again, the basic thesis is if you get people, land, and water together, you can get a massive increase in productivity. And let's talk about all the reasons why. The first one is you can do more cycles per year, right? So the farmers that we currently work with right now, before working with us, do 1.1 seasons per year. That means for almost all of our farmers, that land is fallow for 8 months of the year. Obviously, you're not going to get a lot of productivity if it's just sitting there for 8 months. Number two, they can do higher value crops. Instead of doing maize and beans, they can do tomatoes, onions, spaghetti, managu, and the rest, right? So that makes a lot more productivity, higher yield, and also higher value. Three, irrigation obviously allows for more yield per cycle. And then four, also it allows for counter-cyclical planting. So one of the issues that our farmers have right now is that when the rainy season comes, everyone plants the exact same crops. So 3 months later, everyone is harvesting the same crops. So for a month, there's oversupply in the market, prices drop, farmers get frustrated, and they say, hey, farming's not worth my time. But if they had planted 2 months earlier or 2 months later, they might have been able to hit it when prices are 2, 3, or even 4x higher. And you can make a lot of money that way, right? Would you rather sell your tomatoes at 50 or 25, right? The math is pretty simple. Irrigation allows for that. So those are all the values of irrigation. What we do is we find communities of potential that don't have access to irrigation, and then we effectively build a network system that brings water from a local water source up into the entire community. So the key foundational tenet is shared infrastructure. So previously you might have 10 different farmers, they would have 10 different pumps, 10 different main lines, 10 different solar panels, 10 different electrical systems. There's no cost savings there, right? But imagine, let's say you put all of those 10 in one system, or maybe you put 100 farmers on one system. Then your cost savings become massive. The system becomes much easier to install. You can provide better service for lower costs. So that's what we do. We build systems. We connect 40, 50 farmers at a time, and then there's no upfront cost for them. They don't have to buy anything. They don't have to pay for anything. They don't have to get any permits. We do all of that. The company does all of it. And then the farmers pay a small monthly fee for access to the water. Then when the farmer has access to water, they can start that journey from subsistence to small-scale commercial farmer. There's more to it, but that is the primary innovation of the business. And the reason why I say that we're the only ones doing that is because we're the only ones doing shared infrastructure that goes way beyond the water source. There are plenty of companies, some of them are very good companies, such as Sun Culture, selling good products, where if you are immediately adjacent to a water source, they'll sell you an individual system. Great. But what if you're 100 meters away or 1,000 meters away? Nobody's solving that problem except for Stable Foods.
Yeah, that's interesting, because even I imagine from where I come from, like we have a lot of small subsistence farmers, and most of them own like a quarter, maybe 1 acre, this kind of stuff. So it's a little bit difficult, as you say, like to go to an individual farmer and tell them, hey, I'm selling you this. I don't care where you're getting your water source from, but just put it on and maybe it may be helpful for you in the future. So I think from that perspective, it sort of makes sense to do that. So you're saying they will be able to have like a monthly subscription.
That's right. They pay a monthly fee for access to the water. That's right.
So like, give us an example. How does that work? So you have this farmer who was subscribed to your system. So how is it working?
Yeah, so we go into a community first, oddly enough, because we're in the Barasa unit, the Barasa shop. We start with the Barasa. We sit under the mango tree. We get out the plastic chairs. We have soda and mandazi, and we just explain, hey, we're Stable Foods. What are your challenges with farming? Universally, the number one challenge with farming is inconsistent access to water, and a few others. And then we say, great, would you be interested in hearing more about a solution that can provide you 12 months of the year of water, and you don't have to pay for anything up front? People are obviously very excited to hear about that. And then we do, more one-on-one meetings, and we get signups. Let's say we'll get 20 or 30 signups, and then we start building the infrastructure. So we get a big pump, we do a main line, solar power, reservoir, drip lines, the whole thing. And then once we do the install, we say, okay, we're not turning on the water until you pay. You pay the rate based on your acre, larger acre, obviously larger fee, and then we turn on the water, and then you get a water certain number of days per month, and it allows you to have 12 months of the year of irrigation, which allows for all those benefits I mentioned before. No worries about drought, no worries about flood. You can do 3 cycles a year. You can do high value crops, and you can plant on the off cycle so that you can hit the market when the prices are highest.
Yeah. So I imagine like someone has already signed up to the service. So then what happens? Like, let's say it's harvest season and maybe the farmer doesn't have the markets to sort of sell those produce and maybe have the enough capital, to actually repay for the subscription. What happens?
Yeah, Brian, great question. So one of the things that if you ever go to like any startup conference, there's always a conversation about how starting up a business, especially in a slightly less developed area of the world, we're not talking about Sweden or Tokyo here, you have to do multiple things. So when we started, we were like, you know what, we'll just be able to provide the water and then everything else will take care of it. What we quickly realized is that what you've just asked is a really important part of closing that loop. So we provide the water. We also do market offtake as well, if the farmers want us to. If the farmers have their own buyers, they've got their own trucks, whatever it is, no problem. But if you don't, let's say that because previously you've never done commercial farming, and now all of a sudden you got 10,000 kilos of tomatoes and you need somebody to be an off-taker, then we can be that off-taker as well. So we buy, and then we have our own shops actually. So if you ever come to Homa Bay, you can come to the Stable Foods shop with a Stable Foods employee, and you can buy Stable Foods produce that we have purchased directly from the farmers.
Wow. Yeah, then that is sort of like end-to-end sort of a system.
A to Z. The idea is, in theory, a farmer shouldn't have to work with anybody else. We also provide credit because farmers need working capital, and we also do agricultural training as well. So you've got the water, you've got the credit, you've got the ag services, and you've got the market access. In theory, Stable Foods, full shop.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's a very like intensive, capital business, because you have to provide all those services.
In terms of capital, the main capital is really just in the infrastructure, but we've actually done a really good job. It's one of the things that my team and I are really proud of, starting well over $2,000 per installed acre, and now we're finishing a site, and I think when we finish it up, it'll be below $1,000 per installed acre, which is per industry standards fantastic, and we're very comfortable with that, and it allows us to have the payback model we need to attract the investors that we want. So that's mainly where the capital is, but also pumps and solar panels will last at least 10 years, main lines 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. So yeah, there's a capital element, but most of that stuff is going to be around long enough to like send a toddler to college. You know what I mean? So not too much that needs to happen after that. Also, we only do solar pumping systems, and so the operating cost also is quite minimal once the installation is complete.
Yeah. So I'm also guessing like the scale sort of effect. So the more you're able to do the the less the cost will be.
That's right. Yeah, it turns out there are high economies of scale with solar pumping systems, and for the mainline systems, those are the main elements that are costly. And so, if you go from 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, you just get lower and lower capex cost per acre. So that is the strategy. That is the play.
Okay, makes sense. So talk to me a little bit about the technology part of it, because once someone has subscribed to the model, like, is there a technology that you're using behind it that is helping the farmer, maybe in terms of disease or in terms of climate? Yep. Is there any technology you're employing behind it?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, Stable Foods is a business model innovation, right? We didn't invent solar pumps and we didn't invent drip lines, but we are bringing that stuff to farmers that never otherwise would have been able to access or to afford it themselves. So our first innovation, although not tech, is drip lines, because most of the farmers, I assume that use furrow irrigation, the flood irrigation, right? And whereas drip lines are far more precise, so you can have, depending on the crop, between 10 and 30% higher seed count, which then leads to 10 to 30% higher yield, which is what everybody wants. So that's number one. And then in terms of the tech that we are employing, so we are employing solar powered and cellular controlled valves, so that we can just by a push of a button on a phone, you can turn the valves on and off, which allows us to provide better water access, and it also allows us to reduce our overall costs, which of course then allows us to provide better services to the business. And we haven't started, but we're about to start incorporating drones to do aerial analysis. Drones can help us estimate yield. They can help us identify areas where maybe our irrigation isn't being complete, and in some cases they can even identify pests and diseases. And if you want to spend a little more money on drones, you can even do foliar sprays and pesticides and herbicides through the drones themselves. So that's going to be really exciting. And then in addition, we're creating a platform that links our farmers to us, and then us to our downstream customers, the mama and boga and the buyers, so that we can basically have one sort of seamless network, so we know exactly sort of in real-time demand what we need to have at any given time.
So given that you have been doing this, I'm assuming you have some farmers already who are in the system. So is there any success stories sort of that you can share with us of a farmer who has been using your system and is seeing maybe a 10x or 3x in terms of production?
Absolutely, yes. So we definitely track that information, and we watch that stuff pretty closely. Obviously, we want to make sure for two reasons. One, that we're providing the impact that we want to be providing, but also that we're providing the value to the farmer, right? There's no point in asking them to join all this program and pay the money if they're not actually making a lot more out of this. So the short answer is we did admittedly an internal impact assessment about a year ago, and we found that on average farmers were making 480% more profit in a year with us than the year before with us. And that is for all the reasons I said: higher yield, higher value crops, higher sell price because they were planting during the dry season, and very importantly, the multiple cycles per year. So 480%, and we are very proud of that. That said, there were still some, we'll call them misses, or some areas for improvement. And in fact, if you take some of the misses out, which you shouldn't, because of course they happened, that average was actually closer to 600%. And in some instances, we even hit 1,000%. And that is, of course, the stuff that we're really proud of, because we've transitioned subsistence farmers who are producing very little, making very little, into small scale commercial farmers at a successful level. Just recently, we had a guy just a month or two ago. He had never done commercial farming before, so he'd done maize and beans, but that was it. He made, on a per acre basis, revenue, not profit, but on a per acre basis, he made 860,000 shillings in one season. So obviously, if you're able to do that 3 seasons a year, you're talking about 2.4 million shillings, and that is life-changing money for rural Kenya, in an area where there's no running water, there's no electricity, there's not even paved tarmac.
Yeah. Those are impressive numbers, I must say, in terms of percentages and what you're able to do to the small-scale farmers. And most people I know, at least, who want to start a business are very skeptical in terms of working with small-scale farmers, obviously, for obvious reasons. But for you, what do you think then are the challenges you've been faced so far working with small-scale farmers?
Brian, that's a great question. One of the challenges is just that you've got this business, you've got this business plan, you've got this business strategy, you've got all these employees, and they want to just run, and then maybe a smallholder farmer is just working on a slightly different pace, if you know what I mean, right? I know I am very Mzungu. I talk fast, I walk fast, I think fast. I want things to be done quickly, right? Because this is how startups survive. That's not always the pace that a smallholder farmer is interested in. Also, I know personally that I'm not out there to steal their land or to rob them of their title deed, but there has been a lot of instances of nefarious people coming and scamming people out of their land. So there's a real trust gap as well. So both of those things combined mean that like we are together, but sometimes we're just going to move a little bit slower than maybe the fast-talking, Mzungu from Virginia wants to happen. So that's number one. And then number two is I would say that it's really important to remember that subsistence farmers, smallholder farmers, not all, but many live a life of economic diversification, right? So when you don't have a lot of life savings, you don't have a lot of money in the bank, you can't put all your eggs into one basket. So they've got a little job over here, they got another opportunity over here, they got a side hustle and a second side hustle over here. So then it's important to recognize that when you are just going to be one portion of their economic opportunity until they realize that this is a really good one and they should invest a little bit more time, energy, and money. And so those are some of the main things that you just really need to take into consideration when you're working with a smallholder farmer population.
Yeah. That's very important as well because it's very diverse. I mean, I'm guessing if you've walked into different communities, I guess people in the coast are very different culturally and in terms of what they value in the western part. So far you've concentrated mostly in the Nyanza region, right? Sure. Yeah. Any plans like to go to other places?
We would love to. And in fact, it was a really pleasant time for me during sort of Q2 and Q3 of last year. I went to 10 different counties around Kenya. I talked to over 600 farmers. Me personally spent a lot of time in matatus. It was a slow but enjoyable experience. And so I know for a fact that there is demand for our products and service all across Kenya, right? Because everybody knows that they can be making more with productivity improvements, and the number one productivity improvement is going to be irrigation, right? So there's no shortage of demand. In fact, I still usually get phone calls, usually 2 to 3 times a month, from people who have heard from from a cousin or a friend, whatever. Hey, can you come and do this irrigation thing in Meru, Laikipia, Baringo, Tana, whatever. We will eventually get all over Kenya, and we will be eventually Pan-African. Right now, our goal is to focus on the sites that we have installed right now, get some of our KPIs where we really want them to be, and then go back to the investment market, fundraise a couple $1 million, and then start putting sites all over the place. But yeah, there's this product, this system works basically everywhere. Not everywhere, but basically everywhere. There's no reason why we wouldn't be basically everywhere in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's good news, I guess, for someone who might want some of your products as well.
Very good. We'd be happy to have you as a client.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we can always explore, especially from where I come from. Very similar circumstances to where you're currently based. So that should be able to actually fit in the long term as well. So there's been a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture, and I think this is something that a lot of people in the agriculture space want to implement in their services. So from your perspective, is there something you're doing in terms of encouraging these small-scale farmers to sort of adapt to this regenerative practice?
I would say that we're sort of about halfway through our regenerative agriculture journey. So there's certain things like we don't do monocropping, of course. We also do obviously crop rotation. You can't do tomatoes 3 times in a row. We all know why. I assume all of your listeners know why, because that increases resistance to pests and diseases, of course. And we do minimum tillage, right? Because once you get those beds in place, try not to disturb it as much as possible. And we also obviously do composting and we use organic inputs such as manure as much as humanly possible. Now, what you know, because you have a master's degree, you know this better than I, is that it's sometimes hard to make that last transition away from synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. And so that is what we are working on now, coming together with a more integrated plan so we can tell farmers, all right, over the next 3 years, we're going to do these 10 little steps. Each cycle, we're going to do one thing differently such that in 3 years, we can be removing ourselves entirely from synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. We're on the journey. We're not there entirely. We have some partners in Kenya that are helping us with that, both on a training perspective and an input provision perspective. But of course, it's again, it's easier for a business to make that transition than it is for the smallholder farmers, because again, when you're living month to month, paycheck to paycheck, and someone says, hey, I've got this great idea, it's going to lower your cost and improve your yield in 3 years, you're like, buddy, I need low cost and high yield now. And so we take it sort of step by step, and we even sometimes even a little bit do it like portion by portion.
Yeah, that's also very interesting, because it is hard for a small scale farmer. I mean, if you can tell him, hey, don't do tillage for this season, and you're like, how is that going to help me personally in terms of my income? Yeah. So I can see there's a lot of that mind shift that needs to happen from a farmer's perspective in order for them to be able to adapt this regenerative practices.
And the other thing is, I must be honest, again, I am a guest here, and we want to provide very good advice, but I try not to tell people what to do, right? This is their land. This is their life. We want to provide guidance, and we have the best interest in the farmer in mind, but this is their community, and this is their prerogative to some extent.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting space in terms of how different companies are approaching that area. One very interesting thing about Staple Foods, you have been able to sort of raise money already. I'm guessing there's a lot of people watching this, and maybe they want to start a company, or they are in that phase of, what, I need to raise some money for my company. So from your experience, what do they need to do?
Sure, that's a big, long question. First and foremost, obviously have a business plan that makes sense, right? You don't need to have a super fancy pitch deck, right? I understand that is a thing. Sometimes, you got this super flash deck, and even though it's a crappy business, you still raise $2 million. Yeah, that does happen. But for the most part, investors are pretty intelligent, and they'd rather see a good business plan and a crappy deck than a really flash deck and a crappy business plan. So that means just making sure you understand your unit economics, right? Money in, money out, and a gross margin that's positive at the bottom. That's really step one, right? Understanding that you have a product or a service that customers not just want, but that they will pay for. And that's two very different things, right? And then after that, you got the business model, explain your customers and your revenues and your costs and your growth trajectory and all that kind of stuff. Then you got to look for the right investor. And that is not the easiest thing in the world. The investor landscape, it's not like you just go to one directory and you see 1,000 people and you can filter them out. So networking, connectioning, those sorts of things are very valuable. I've been in the space now for almost 3 years, so I know about 80 different investors on a first name basis. But I didn't know that. I didn't know those 80 investors 3 years ago. If you really want to know, if you're in a company position, Google early stage startup investors or pre-seed startup investors, and then see what pops. You'll get accelerator programs, which can sometimes give you seed money, $20,000 or $30,000, $40,000, and a lot of investment support to get you to that next level so you can really grow. There are companies that exist specifically for this purpose.
Yeah. Do you think it's harder to raise money for agricultural businesses than it is for any other business? Let's say, for example, for software businesses and stuff.
I'll try very hard not to be biased, but especially not just the agriculture space, but the smallholder farmer space, I think is even one level of a subset of the agricultural space. Look, there are a lot of investors out there, thoughtful, impact focused, and also just ones that want to make money. Nothing wrong with that either, that are really interested in the agricultural space because they recognize what we have recognized, which is that we are nowhere near optimization. We are nowhere near peak productivity. That said, Yes, it is easier to make money with fintech than it is to make money with some of the poorest and most economically marginalized people in the world. Yeah. So I'll let that be my summary.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. So we've talked about some of the challenges that small-scale farmers face. Is there something that you think from a policy perspective and from a government perspective that governments can do to help these small-scale farmers, in fact, be sort of investable from investors and sort of from other people who might want to be involved with these small-scale farmers? Sure.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because the obvious thing is like provide better services, but also I understand that Kenya has a lot of needs for its tax dollars, right? Do you want to provide better agricultural extension services? Because right now it's like one agricultural extension officer for over 1,000 farmers. That's difficult for that extension officer to provide a lot of value. Or do you want to improve the roads? Or do you want to improve the schools? Or do you want to improve, relations with other countries, right? I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to make a call on that. Everyone wants another $1 million, right? One thing I will say is that I have found it particularly difficult, surprisingly difficult a little bit, to engage with the governmental players. Just like a convening opportunity. Like there's a National Irrigation Authority. I have tried very hard to get a meeting with the National Irrigation Authority, and I have been unable to do so, even though I think that they would be interested in what I'm doing. Also, the National Irrigation Authority is spending millions of dollars to put in projects. But then what I'm hearing is they don't have a downstream partner. I'm that downstream partner. Maybe there's an opportunity for collaborate. And look, I get it. I'm a nobody, right? I got a small company. No one's ever heard of me, right? Like, what am I going to do? Write an MP and expect a response? So I'm not saying that that's what should be happening, but an opportunity for convening the partners together and having a collaborative dialogue. Because at the end of the day, it's never going to be government alone. It's never going to be private sector alone. That collaboration together is going to be the most functional, the most valuable.
Yeah. So sort of government needs to be more proactive in terms of listening to what small-scale farmers or investors want for better collaboration.
I am not going to say that the government needs to do anything. But if there were an opportunity to get a seat at that table, I think that our collaboration would be valuable for the government, the company, and let's be honest, the most important elements, the farmers, right? I mean, look, let's just think about it another way, right? There were two reports that came out. The UN did one, and then there was International Water Management Institute through FAO. They did another one. They said about the same thing. About 17 cubic kilometers of water are available for irrigation that are not captured in Kenya every year. They either go into Lake Turkana, the salty areas, or they go out to the Indian Ocean, or they're just missed, right? 17 cubic kilometers, you can irrigate somewhere between 2 and 3 million acres. Now imagine if even a small portion of those 2 or 3 million acres were irrigated, and then they were able to achieve a 20,000 kilos productivity per acre per year. Kenya would be on the front page of every newspaper, magazine, front page news of being the world's most productive agricultural country, right? Forget importing food, we'd be exporting food. It would be an absolute transformation. It would be a rural agricultural revolution. That is going to be easier when you have all the partners together working at once.
That's true. Okay, yeah, I see your point now.
If President Ruto wants to get his name on a bunch of magazines, this is one way to do it that everyone is going to be happy about.
Yeah, true. So let's talk a little bit about the future of staple foods and where you see yourself. So take us through a little bit in the next 5 years, maybe. What do you see your involvement? What do you see your role is going to be for small-scale farmers? And even you can lay out your long-term, what are your long-term goals?
Sure. Short term, it is all about focusing on the sites that we have active at the moment and making sure that they're operating as well as possible, right? You don't want to expand when you haven't got all your ducks in a row in your first areas, right? But we're actually making a lot of progress in ways that we're really proud of. Again, we're lowering our CapEx even further. We're lowering our OpEx further. Site designs actually in much more intelligent way. So we're providing better water and it's simpler for our staff. That means that farmers farmers are going to be able to farm better, and it's going to cost us less. Overall, very good for the business. After that, though, we're going to want to continue to expand around Kenya. So right now, the majority of our irrigation is lake fed, but we'd like to get into rivers, reservoirs, which require government collaboration, potentially doing more borehole rehabilitation, and just get all around so that everybody knows that when you talk to Stable Foods, it means that we are a reliable source for irrigation and market offtake if necessary, right? And so then once we've, even in the short term proven that, then it's, get that 7-figure, maybe even 8-figure investment to just expand, right? And then it gets to be really exciting because then you can start collaborating with bigger organizations, bigger companies. So instead of talking to one farmer at a time, maybe you talk to 1,000 farmers at a time. Boom. Maybe instead of 50-acre sites, you do 500-acre sites, right? All of this stuff just makes things easier, bigger, and that is, of course, better for the company. And then that, of course, is better for the farmers because our services will be improved. Usually when I'm not popular and I'm not famous, but every now and then I have a speaking engagement at a conference or maybe a podcast like this or an article. And then people will reach out to me and say, hey, I've got this farm in Tanzania, I got this farm in Nigeria, I got this farm in Ghana. All we need is irrigation. We'll take care of all the rest. And I always say, look, as soon as we get the investment ready to take us there, we're ready to go. We've been doing this for almost 3 years now. We've had a lot of learning opportunities. We feel really good about our ability to scale. It's just finding those opportunities, putting them in the ground and going. But that's just the core business. Going even further beyond the core business, I think that one of the things we're going to get into is export, right? What do I always say is first and foremost, local supply, local demand. But let's be honest, if you have a 500-acre site, you probably don't need to be doing 500 acres of kale, right? The community just doesn't need that much kale. So maybe you do 50 acres of kale, and then maybe it's 450 acres of something else that's a high-value crop for export. And then you rotate them around. So all the farmers get the opportunity to have the local and the export over the course of a year, right? So that's a really obvious one. And then another one is potentially post-harvest value addition, right? So we've got a lot of grade 3 tomatoes. Should we be turning those into tomato paste, et cetera, et cetera? There's many other examples such as that. And then you go broader. I mean, eventually we would love to get into really like the educational environment, right? Because again, we're taking farmers that have never really done commercial scale farming before, and we're asking them to be commercial farmers. There's a lot of educational component for that. You have a whole master's degree in this, maybe even perhaps a bachelor's. That's 6 years, right? But can we turn this into like a 6-month academy for like the best farmers in the region that then can be the staff members and the guides for everybody else? It's not a new idea. Other organizations have done it, but we really do want to be the A to the Z, and agricultural knowledge is an element of that.
Yeah, I must say that's a bold vision that lies ahead.
We're not here to do small improvements. Just to be very clear, right? Like we are shooting for that 500% increase, that 1,000% increase. There's nothing wrong with a 20% increase, but a 20% increase of extremely poor and extremely economically isolated is not materially improving, right? Like 500% and above is what we're going for. That's what's going to bring the economic transformation and the food security transformation that we need.
Yeah. Then I think the future looks good as well from that perspective.
Yeah, no, we're optimistic. We've proven a lot of things, and we want to continue to prove more.
Nice. So right now you could be in Virginia in the US, just relaxing, and maybe life would be a little bit easier. Given that you have now, dived into this mission, what do you think is your mission going forward? What keeps you going? What's your motivation to keep, helping small scale farmers?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the fundamental hypothesis, which is just this system as it stands is incredibly inefficient. And that is frustrating, right? Just like if you saw someone trying to do an extremely difficult multi-step calculus program with long division and everything on a pen and paper, Okay, sure, maybe if it's for practice, do it on pen and paper, but otherwise, if you just need the answer, here's this thing called a calculator. Let's just make your life a lot easier, right? That's why we invent tools, we invent systems and processes. Same thing here, right? It doesn't make sense that 4.5 to 5 million smallholder farmers in Kenya are producing 500 kilos a year in maize and beans and not selling any of it for produce, right? Like I said before, that gentleman who made 860,000 shillings in an acre, that's what I'm talking about. Imagine if every single smallholder farmer in Kenya was generating revenue of 1.5 million shillings a year per acre. How much downstream transformation would that be for the entire community, right? You know, people would have cell phones. Young women, particularly, men as well, would be able to go to school for longer. They'd be able to go to university more, right? The communities themselves would have just less inherent poverty, right? I mean, just all of the downstream that comes from people being able to make, frankly, a lot more money, and also the nutritional value that comes from everyone being able to access the food that they need 12 months of the year is enough of a motivation for me.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think helping someone is always a good motivation, but helping people actually improve their lives 500, 600%, that's huge. So kudos for that, and I'm looking forward for your journey as well in that area.
Thank you. So am I.
Yeah. So this is a part of the podcast where I call it the rapid fire questions.
I love it.
So I've prepared like 10 questions for you. So the idea behind is really to get to know a little bit better, just in case it didn't come through during this conversation. So that should be fun. Are you ready to get going?
I've been playing trivia my whole life. I'm ready for this.
Okay, let's go. So the first question is, what was the first career you dreamt of having as a kid?
Cliche as hell, but I wanted to be an astronaut. That sounds so fun, right? Not nearly smart enough, so I'm glad I didn't even try, to be honest.
Okay, so the second question, if you had to eat only one meal for the rest of your life, what will it be?
Oh man, okay, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to say 2. If sustainability didn't matter, honestly, I might go with sushi. It is just so good. It is so yummy. It's got vegetables, it's got a little bit of carbohydrates, it's got protein, and it's just so clean and fresh. Incredible, but terrible for the world. We are destroying the world's oceans. So then if sustainability mattered, I will say the regular, like, basic street food in Nicaragua, rice, beans, a little bit of salad, delicious. I ate it 2-3 meals a day. I was there for a year and a half. The day I left, I almost cried because I knew I was going to miss that the day I left.
Yeah. Have you tried any Kenyan street food?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I have a kibanda on the way to work. I have a kibanda on the way back. I love samaki, na ugali, na mboga. I love dengu, githeri. I eat all that stuff. It is great.
Yeah, that's a good selection right there. So that question, when you're not working, how do you like to spend your time?
Sure. Man, it's a little boring, a little basic, but like I try to exercise. I usually exercise 4 or 5 days a week, so I put that in my calendar for sure. And then otherwise, I hang out with my friends. I got a really sweet wife, just got married last month, and I like to read.
Nice. So the fourth question, what's one challenge that keeps you up at night?
Stable foods. I just want to look, there's so many great things that we're doing, but also there's so much sort of ecosystem that needs to be built, right? Like I said, we thought we would just do irrigation. Now we got to do sales. We also got to do credit. We also got to do ag knowledge. So making sure that the farmers are able to engage with us in a way that value we create is consistent. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So the fifth question: where is one place you like to go that you haven't been?
There's many, but top of mind, I'm going to go with Mozambique. I really like to surf, and the food looks awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Sixth, what's your favorite book?
Brian, I don't love favorites, so I'm going to answer it a different way. I'm reading a good book right now that I just picked up at Half Price Books in Lavington. It's a couple years old, so the date is maybe a little bit out of date. It's called The End of Men, and obviously it's a dramatic title. People just need to make titles so that people buy books. But it's about how primarily in Europe and the United States for the last 30 or 40 years, men have not been performing relatively as well as women have in academic settings and professional settings, and so then the sort of societal frustrations that come from that that we have not been managing very well. In fact, I think it's one of the primary reasons why Donald Trump is president, because we got a lot of angry, formerly middle-class men that are looking for a savior.
7th question. If you could grab coffee with any 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Oh man, I don't have a very good answer to this. Some of the old scientists, I suppose, like Galileo and Isaac Newton, just because I'd be like, how do you guys even think this way? I lived 2,000 years after you and I don't have a clue what you're thinking. Wouldn't that be cool if I could just learn a little bit more? And then on the other side, it's just like I have a lot of friends that live continents away that I only get to see every 4 or 5 years. So like just in the basics, I just love to see some of my old buddies.
So the 8th question, what's been your most fulfilling moment since you've been working at Stable Foods?
Yeah, I would say that they come in steps, but it's whenever we are able to bring a farmer in. Maybe they were even skeptical. Hey, I've never done farming before. I'm primarily a fisher person. Fine, I'll try it. And then all of a sudden they are like, oh, I just made a lot of money. I just really improved my family's position. This is something I can take really seriously now. Like that transition moment is just a remarkable moment in my life, in their lives, in the business life, because that's what we're here to do.
Yeah. That should be fulfilling. The 9th question, what quote resonates with you most?
I might cheat and go with 2, but one from my childhood that I learned just when I was a teenager by Robert Altman, who is a not very well-known director. I don't even think I care about his movies, but he says, to play it safe is not to play. And admittedly, I come from a position of privilege, so I can take risks. I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but one of the things I'm proud of in my life is that I have taken a lot of risks, personal and professional. Not all of them have worked out, not by any means, but like upward trajectory, and I've lived the life I've wanted to live accordingly. We'll go with that.
Yeah. That's very powerful. So the last question, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
The first thought was try to specialize a little bit more. I've had a career that has spanned at least 7 different industries, and that has been incredibly fulfilling. Diversity of experience has been fantastic, but also if you have a different industry every 3 years, you don't become that specialist, right? That said, my career has gotten me to an absolutely incredible place. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, not by accident, but I wonder if I had specialized, would I have ended up in such a beautiful place? And I kind of doubt it, frankly. So then I guess the advice I'd give is chill out just a little bit. Try not to hold on so tightly. If you can relax a little bit, it'll be better for everybody else around you.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. So those are 10 questions. Overall, thank you very much for making time for the podcast. It's really a pleasure to have a conversation with you. For guys who want to follow your work, how can they find you and get a hold of you?
www.stable-foods.com. That's our URL. Also, you can also find the company Stable Foods or me, myself, Andrew Massaro on LinkedIn, of course. That's the easiest way to do it. Send it, and there's also a sort of a form on the website. So you put your email address in there. We can give you on the newsletters. If there's ideas that you think we should do for expansion, we've even hired people sometimes say, "Hey, I'm ready to do this work." Cool. What's your CV? What's your background? Okay, we'll give you a shot. We're not hiring right now, but we never know what happens next month. Those are the best ways.
All right. Yeah. I think that's very clear. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. You've been very open and very, a lot of wisdom you've poured in this podcast. So I guess a lot of people will be able to appreciate that. Really appreciate it. So thank you for making that time. So till the next podcast, remember to be organic. Cheers.